The day this policy surfaced, domestic chip designers in China moved sharply higher on the exchange, and the document that caused it never once named what investors understood it to mean. 8 agencies signed their names to a directive endorsing a single open instruction set, and the market decoded the silence faster than any analyst could write a note on it. One document, read twice, first for what it plainly establishes, then for the 2 architectures it is careful enough never to mention. The record is the point. Its omissions are the argument. The policy formally endorses an open, license-free instruction set architecture, developed originally at an American university and now governed as an international standard, as the direction for Chinese procurement and domestic chip design to follow. That is what the text says on its face in its affirmative clauses, addressed simultaneously to the agencies that decide what the state will buy, and to the designers who decide what the country will build. The document does not frame this as a suggestion. 8 agencies co-signing a single guidance instrument is how Beijing signals priority. The cyberspace regulator, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, and 6 further institutions do not arrive at the same page by accident. The co-signature is itself a clause in the record, one that says, "This carries the combined authority of the institutions that govern both the demand side and the supply side of the country's technology sector." The guidance positions the open licensing arrangement as a feature rather than a footnote. The absence of royalty obligations to any foreign licensor is the thing being elevated, not merely the technical properties of the instruction set. The record shows a state placing formal weight on the fact that no one outside its borders holds a licensing key to the architecture it is now directing its industry toward. That is the first reading. It is coherent, it is directional, and the investment community confirmed it in real time on the day the document surfaced, before the analysts had written their notes. Reading it again, the restraint accumulates. The document names the architecture to move toward. It does not name the 2 architectures it is moving away from. The proprietary design controlled by an American firm, which sits inside the overwhelming share of the country's computing infrastructure, goes unmentioned. The instruction set licensed by a British firm, whose licensing terms sit in part under the jurisdiction of a government that has already demonstrated willingness to restrict them, goes unmentioned. Those 2 names are the negative space the policy is drawn around, and the decision not to name them is not an oversight in an 8-agency document. Documents of this weight do not reach publication with accidental omissions. Naming the incumbents would constitute an admission about dependency in a text already calibrated to operate inside existing trade tensions. The restraint is functional. It is the most deliberate sentence in the record, and it was never written. The directive sets a direction. It does not set a deadline. The record contains no clause establishing a date by which procurement must have shifted, no threshold percentage for adoption in state-linked purchasing, no sunset language for the architectures it declines to name. A directive without a timeline is a signal, not a mandate, and the distinction matters because it suggests the authors understood something the document chose not to say. That the ecosystem required to execute this transition is not yet in place, and the official text was not going to be the place where that gap became visible. The endorsement is real. The mechanism for acting on it is not a number this document provides. There is a further silence, and it is the largest one. The policy does not address, at any granularity the document makes available, the question of software compatibility. The existing body of code written for the incumbent architectures, accumulated across roughly a decade of deployment, across phones, servers, and industrial systems, runs on instruction sets that are not the one being endorsed. Carrying that software across to a different architecture is the single largest engineering and commercial obstacle to any transition of this kind, and the record is silent on it. Declaring that all future roads will be built to a new standard gauge is a decision that can be made in an afternoon. Converting the rolling stock already running on the old gauge is the decade that follows the announcement, and this decree contains no timetable for the trains. The silence does not mean the authors have no answer. It means this document is not where that answer was placed. What the policy establishes is direction. What it does not establish is the mechanism for covering the distance between the direction and the destination. The record does not disclose which agencies or state-linked procurement bodies have already begun piloting systems built on the endorsed architecture, or whether any such pilots exist at meaningful scale. The document issues direction, but does not confirm that the infrastructure for executing it is operational. The record also does not establish the current share of the endorsed architecture in Chinese production relative to the incumbents, which means the baseline from which this policy departs is not a number the document provides. Independent analyst estimates for that figure vary considerably and carry their own methodological caveats. An absent clause is not a resolved question. The silence about software migration does not confirm that the migration has been achieved or abandoned. It confirms only that this document is not where that answer was placed, and policy guidance and procurement reality can diverge in ways that later amendments, implementation notices, or aggregate purchasing data would eventually reveal, none of which this record predates. What the document settles is the official position. What it leaves open is whether the official position has yet encountered the full weight of what executing it requires, and those are different things the same text cannot resolve. Read this policy once, and it is a coherent endorsement of an open architecture by a state with documented reasons to prefer one. Read it a second time, and the pattern of what was chosen not to say becomes the more consequential text. No named incumbents, no deadline, no migration path, no baseline from which the transition is measured. The record establishes, in the aggregate of what it said and what it left out, that the decision to move has been made at the level where such decisions become official. The architecture of the transition, unlike the architecture of the chip, has not yet been written into any document this office has seen. The policy names the destination. The road it does not name is the one already being built. The next document worth reading closely may be a procurement specification, a standards body filing, or a software compatibility framework. Whichever record is first to put the migration problem into writing is the one that will tell us whether this policy found its mechanism or only its announcement. If that is the kind of close reading you want to do alongside us, the subscribe button is how you stay at the table, and notifications are how you know when the next document surfaces.